The story begins with the protagonist already in the depths of hell, wielding his sword and cutting through every creature in sight. While he's battling these demons, the largest one appears and confronts him, asking how he dares attempt to pass the guardian of the demon god's gates. The guardian declares he will cut the protagonist in half. However, when he launches his attack, the protagonist blocks it with his sword and sarcastically asks why the guardian doesn't just open the gate and stop being such a nuisance. He even considers letting the guardian live until the guardian hurls him away, calling him a reckless idiot. The guardian then declares that the protagonist will die today. Unfazed, the protagonist charges again. Despite the guardian's massive size, the protagonist lands several strikes and even uses the guardian's body to propel himself away, tearing off one of the demon's arms in the process. At that moment, a small flame appears beside the protagonist and remarks how cruel he is, suggesting he should have just killed the demon outright. The now one-armed guardian angrily demands to know how the protagonist dares challenge the demon god and asks if he isn't afraid of death. He vows that the protagonist will perish by the demon god's hands, but before he can finish, the protagonist drives his blade through the guardian, creating a massive hole in his chest. Annoyed by how noisy the guardian is, the protagonist remarks that he's putting an end to the racket. The guardian collapses, shouting in disbelief, and dies. The fiery skull beside the protagonist asks what he plans to do next, now that he's killed the guardian. It warns that the demon god won't take this lightly. The protagonist confidently replies that he knows exactly what he's doing. The skull questions whether he's trying to kill the demon god and become the ultimate being in hell, to which the protagonist admits that the idea sounds appealing. When pressed for his reason, the protagonist reveals that he's been trapped in hell for 80 years, fighting countless demons to survive. But in those battles, he's learned that every demon has a story, a reason they ended up in hell. This has made him wonder why the demon god dragged him to hell in the first place. That's the real question he wants answered. The skull calls him an idiot, suggesting he could have just asked politely for mercy. But the protagonist insists that the demon god must pay for what he's done, for making him suffer all these years. Standing before the demon god's palace, he brandishes his sword and charges forward. Suddenly, the scene shifts. The protagonist finds himself in a hospital bed. He wakes up, sweating and confused, wondering if he's dreaming. It's been decades since he last dreamed of Earth, at least 30 years. He tries to move his arm but finds he's too weak. Convinced it's a lucid dream, he wonders if he's in a vegetative state. Just then, a nurse accidentally drops a tray of water. Startled, she looks at him and exclaims that her son has finally woken up. The protagonist feels a wave of discomfort at this dream, finding it childish and embarrassing. But when his mother embraces him and calls him her baby, the vividness of the experience makes him question whether it's truly a dream. Meanwhile, back in hell, the palace corridor is littered with the bodies of slain demons. The fiery skull tells the protagonist he's a monster for actually killing the demon god. Annoyed, the protagonist regrets not getting his question answered, as he was too preoccupied with the fight. The demon god lies decapitated, and the protagonist curses himself for not interrogating him first. The skull counters that if he'd hesitated, he might have been killed instead. It asks what the protagonist plans to do now that he's the absolute ruler of hell. Before he can answer, a system-like interface appears beside him, offering the choice to return to Earth. Both the protagonist and the skull are stunned. The protagonist reflects on his 80 years in hell, admitting he prayed every day for escape. He doesn't hesitate. Clicking yes, a blinding light engulfs him. Back in the hospital, the protagonist opens his eyes to find a doctor shining a light in his face, checking his vision and hearing. The doctor informs his family that the protagonist has been in a vegetative state for a long time. While he won't be able to move properly right away, with rehabilitation, he'll recover. His mother tearfully thanks the doctor, who credits her love and dedication for bringing her son back to life. The protagonist suddenly begins screaming uncontrollably. The doctor tries to calm him, but he keeps yelling, asking what kind of nightmare this is. He's unsure whether the dream of the hellish system was real, or if this moment in the hospital is the illusion. Nearby children in the room whisper, wondering if he's going to turn into a monster. When the doctor approaches to soothe him, the protagonist snaps, telling him to stay back, and bites the doctor's hand. Blood drips from the wound as the protagonist demands to know if he's been poisoned, preventing him from moving. He falls from the bed, shouting at everyone, questioning if they even understand the life he's lived. His mother, horrified, calls out his name, Dong, and begs him to stop. But Dong shouts that he's fought for 80 years and demands if anyone understands how horrible it was. I won't die now, he declares. Nurses rush in to restrain him, but Dong, writhing and furious, screams that he'll kill everyone in the room. His mother pleads with him, but his anger only grows as he looks out the window and spots something in the sky, a wormhole. What is that? He wonders. A wormhole? Here on Earth? His frustration boils over as the nurses hold him down. How dare they? He shouts, thrashing. A nurse finally injects a sedative into his neck, and his body gradually relaxes as sleep overtakes him. The next morning, a news broadcast reports a strange gate appearing in the sky. Fortunately, a team of hunters quickly took control of the situation. Back at the hospital, Dong, still in his room, glances out the window and sees the wormhole, surrounded by destruction. Below it, people are battling demons. One of the hunters, reporting to his superior, confirms their success in closing the gate. The superior, still on the phone, instructs him to report back immediately once the cleanup is done. The journalist continues to praise the hunter's quick response, claiming the gate is already closing and the threat is nearly eliminated. Watching the broadcast, Dong thinks, first a wormhole, now a gate, and a team of hunters? He's still processing this when a man enters his room, addressing him directly. The man says, "You're awake now, huh?" Dong, confused, asks, "Who are you?" The man looks taken aback. "Wait, you don't remember me? It's me, Shan Ho." Recognition dawns on Dong. "Oh, Shan Ho. Yeah, I guess I'm okay," he replies half-heartedly. Shan Ho explains that Dong has been unconscious for 10 years. 10 years? Dong repeats, stunned. He recalls the day he collapsed, coming home from school with his friends. Shan Ho explains that Dong has been in the hospital ever since. Reflecting on his time in hell, Dong thinks, I survived 80 years there, but only 10 years passed here. That's a relief, I guess. Shan Ho interrupts his thoughts, telling him how much his mother has sacrificed during his coma. She's been working too, sometimes 3 jobs to cover your hospital bills, he explains. You need to recover quickly. You're the man of the house now. Don't worry, I've already got a job lined up for you once you're ready. Dong nods reluctantly. Later, his mother takes him outside in a wheelchair. She remarks on how nice the weather is, but Dong is lost in thought. In hell, I fought alone for survival. Now, in reality, I have a family to care for, he muses bitterly. His frustration grows as he thinks about his frail body. Unable to move, I'm nothing but a burden. Reality is as bad as hell. Suddenly, 2 men approach. His mother freezes, visibly scared. One of them sneers, "Tough to get in touch with you, huh? You're not planning to pay us back, are you?" The other man adds, "Didn't we say that if you didn't pay up next time, you'd regret it?" Trembling, his mother apologizes, promising to pay next month. The first man mocks her. "Next month? Next month? That's all we ever hear from you." When she tries to plead again, he slaps her, sending her stumbling back. Dong's blood boils as he watches. The man scolds her, saying, "When you take someone's money, you pay it back. What, you think this is a charity?" His mother begs them, "Please, not in front of my child." She promises to pay next month. The man scoffs. "Haven't you learned yet?" He strikes her again, saying she'll get beaten in front of her son if she doesn't comply. Dong, shaking with rage, tries to move, but his body refuses to respond. "Bastards!" he yells. The men turn to him, furious. "What did you just say, you little brat?" "I said, you're useless scum," Dong snarls, though his voice is weak. His mother begs him to stop, but one of the men grabs him. Dong, powerless, is seething with anger as his mother tearfully pleads, "Dong, apologize to them. Do it now." And she tells the men that he's just a patient still recovering. But the man with the scar says he should apologize. The protagonist, being as bold as he is, simply asks, "What are these guys going to do now?" "Huh?" The scarred man replies that his brain hasn't fully awakened yet, so he's going to help wake it up. He throws him far, saying, "He barely moves, but his mouth sure is different, isn't it?" Doong rolls on the ground as the man says, "The best way to kill an insect is to crush it." He starts stomping and kicking Doong, asking, "Why'd you stop talking?" "Huh? Go on, keep talking." The protagonist thinks, if only these bastards were in their normal condition. Meanwhile, his mother is clearly distressed. Still, he seethes internally, thinking, if these sons of __ were in hell with me, they'd be torn in half. Suddenly, a system message appears. A mission has been presented. asking if he accepts. Specifically, it's an advent mission. Doong stares at the system screen for a moment, skeptical. The text explains how the screen appeared out of nowhere. Though wary, he recalls that this system screen kept him alive for 80 years. With no other choice, he clicks accept. The world freezes. Doong notices that only he can move, everything else is completely still, as if time has stopped. He wonders if this is because he accepted the task. The mission details appear: physical restoration. The difficulty is low, and the challenge is to move to the marked location within an hour. The reward: a mysterious recovery potion and a 10% increase in divine figure. Doong asks himself, what the hell is divine figure? Wait, does recovery mean I can return to my original body? Looking at the marked location, it's just 10 meters ahead, slightly behind where his mother and the other guy are. Doong thinks about crawling to get there. Barely able to move, he begins to crawl, muttering how unbelievable it is that he's reduced to this after conquering hell on his own. With 17 minutes left, he realizes he won't make it at this pace and starts thinking of another method. The system has never given him an impossible mission before. Analyzing the task, he realizes he doesn't need to walk to the marked spot, he just needs to move there. What an idiot I've been, he thinks. With 5 minutes remaining, he climbs onto a wheelchair, throwing himself into it. He begins rolling as fast as he can. With 35 seconds left, he starts sweating and pushing harder. At 15 seconds, he feels exhausted but keeps going. With 2 seconds remaining, he crosses the marked spot. Instantly, the mysterious potion appears before him, and the system provides details about the reward: a small potion for the recovery of the absolute being, capable of restoring a portion of the current status. Without hesitation, the protagonist drinks a sip. Immediately, he feels incredible. His pain vanishes, and his energy surges. As time resumes, everyone is shocked to see that the protagonist has disappeared. The scarred man asks, where did he go? Guards arrive, asking what the two men are doing. Doong's mother runs to him while the scarred man and his companion decide to leave, clearly nervous. However, Doong swears he won't let this slide. Later that night, back in the hospital, Doong rests, wondering how the system appeared on Earth. He recalls countless failed attempts to summon it before and shouts again, system screen. Mission. Frustrated, he realizes he needs to recover quickly before those gangsters return. To grow stronger, he needs more missions. At that moment, a new message appears. The Pantheon awaits the return of the absolute being. Doong wonders what that means. Suddenly, he finds himself in a vast, empty space and questions if he's dreaming. A system screen appears, explaining that the absolute being has entered the Pantheon. The spiritual realm recognizes the absolute being's diary. A virtual avatar based on the diary's contents will be created for the protagonist. The realization process will accelerate, and he must complete tasks to achieve full realization. Doong exclaims, so this isn't a dream, is it? All I have to do is follow the system's orders, right? Excited, he prepares to begin. The second Advent mission appears, physical restoration. This time, he must destroy all the targets in front of him. There's no time limit. His goal is to punch a giant, ugly punching bag. Completing this will increase his realization progress by 30%. So, in front of that weird-looking head, which was supposed to be his punching bag, he puts a lot of force into his next punch, so much that he completely disfigures the punching bag. The next mission is to run 10 kilometers in 3 hours. He starts with all the rhythm he can muster. Afterward, new missions appear. The next one requires him to do 1,000 push-ups. He keeps going, doing push-up after push-up, and by the time he's halfway through, his progress meter shows only 55%. DeYoung wonders if this is a joke. He's been doing this for 10 days and is still only at 55%. He starts thinking that all the rewards he's been receiving are just nutritional supplements. Frustrated, he asks for a real mission. Then, the system presents a slightly different task. This time, the mission is called Practice as if it were real. He must defeat a demon-like enemy called the Shoe Demon. DeYoung wonders what that could be, and suddenly, electricity sparks in the area. A giant pillar of light appears before him, and a creature starts emerging. DeYoung says, so it's you, isn't it? My enemy? He recalls nearly dying in hell because of this creature and adds, it's good to see you again. The creature, once fully revealed, is much larger than De-young and, without hesitation, lunges at him with a powerful attack. De-young tries to block it, but quickly realizes that at this rate, he'll be reduced to dust. Desperate, he closes the distance between them, but the demon slaps him aside like a mosquito, slamming him to the ground. Coughing blood, De-young mutters, "This sucks. I'm getting my ass kicked by a crying demon." Embarrassed, he feels humiliated. The demon, of course, is ready to finish him off. Dodging attack after attack, De-young manages to avoid the blows, but eventually, the demon anticipates his moves, grabs him, and squeezes. De-young coughs up even more blood, but then he remembers how they fought in hell and recalls how to defeat it. Trapped in the demon's grasp, he summons his greatsword, something he had forgotten how to do, and cuts the demon's hand clean off. Enraged, the creature becomes even more aggressive, but De-young declares, "This ends now." With incredible speed, he shreds the demon into pieces, completing the mission. Later, he wakes up in a hospital room as the morning light streams in through the window. His mother wakes up, surprised, and exclaims, "Who opened the window?" Turning around, she sees De-young standing there, his muscular body healed. He smiles at her. Later that day, at the doctor's office, they examine De-young's movements while his mother and the doctor observe. She asks how this is possible, given that he was in a vegetative state just days ago and was expected to need at least 6 months of rehabilitation. The doctor replies that this case is medically inexplicable and assures her there's no need to worry. Despite her doubts, she's relieved to see her son doing so well. Meanwhile, De-young tells the nurse to stop poking and prodding him. The nurse apologizes, amazed at how quickly he recovered. In the hospital lobby, De-young sees his mother talking to a nurse named Kim, thanking her for everything she's done over the past 10 years. His mother, crying, calls it a miracle. Seeing this, De-young clenches his fist and vows to protect his mother from now on. Later, in the bathroom, De-young summons the system's Pantheon interface. He asks if there's a way to speed up this so-called divine realization. The system explains that the difficulty level of tasks can be adjusted, and the harder the task, the more progress he can make. De-young sets the difficulty to Hell and declares that he'll complete every mission. A glowing core appears before him, and as he smashes it, an enemy wielding a sword emerges dramatically. De-young remarks on the dramatic entrance, but as the enemy rises, he realizes it's him. The system announces that he must face an absolute being, a doppelganger of himself. De-young mutters, "So hell is me." Huh? Makes sense. The clone charges at him with incredible speed, leaving De-young struggling to react. He manages to block the first attack, but is quickly overwhelmed as the clone strikes from the air. Unable to defend himself effectively, De-young is thrown far into the distance. He mutters, "This is terrible. At this rate, it's going to be awful." The clone doesn't even give him a moment to breathe and immediately closes the distance again, launching a powerful frontal attack. A rapid exchange of blows begins, but it's clear the clone has the upper hand. With the next attack, the protagonist is hit, blood spilling from his leg and arm. He thinks to himself that in his current state, there's no way he can match this strength and speed. The harder the fight gets, the worse it is for him. At that moment, the clone lands a massive blow to his chest, throwing him far away. When he finally crashes to the ground, he's exhausted and coughing up blood. "At this rate, the fake will be more genuine than me," he mutters. "I don't even know whether to feel happy or sad about that. But one thing is certain, this clone is going to die today." He activates bloody demonization, shocking even the clone. But the clone doesn't waste any time. Before the transformation can fully take hold, it rushes forward, splitting the protagonist in two. However, his body quickly regenerates, and he dodges the attack, taunting, "What were you looking at? Huh?" Then, he slams the clone's head into the ground. As he prepares his blade to strike the clone's head, the clone narrowly dodges and retaliates, slicing the protagonist's arm and moving behind him. At that moment, the clone also activates bloody demonization. The protagonist realizes the clone can use it too and mutters that it now feels like they're fighting on equal terms. All he wants is for this bastard to die already. But as he attacks, the clone teleports, avoiding the blow and striking the protagonist squarely in the back. The blade slices deep into his shoulder. Meanwhile, in reality, his body is trembling, standing still in the bathroom. Someone knocks on the door, Asking if anyone is inside, the protagonist can barely respond. The cleaning lady outside wonders why the door is locked and finds it strange. She takes out her keys to open it, but just as she's about to enter, someone calls her from down the hall, reminding her she's needed on the 3rd floor. She hurries off, leaving the bathroom undisturbed. Back in the Pantheon, the clone approaches the protagonist slowly. Suddenly, the system announces that the inventory has been activated. A small portal appears before De-young, and he reaches in, searching for something. "This mission isn't over yet," he declares. From the inventory, he pulls out a potion. "This is the potion I get every time I complete a mission," he says. "I've been saving them for a time like this. These nutritional supplements restore 20% of health and stamina, and he has 5 of them." He decides that will have to be enough. The clone doesn't waste time and uses the opportunity to attack, but De-young dodges and punches the clone in the face, sending it flying. "That's more like it," he smirks. He quickly drinks 3 more potions, aiming to reach 100% health. Just as he's about to drink the last one, the clone nearly lands a kick, but De-young manages to drink it in time. The clone is clearly frustrated and rushes forward again. A fierce exchange of blows begins, and De-young uses the final potion. Despite being fully recovered, the battle remains intense. The clone suddenly grabs De-young by the neck, choking him. With a sinister grin, the clone prepares to finish him off. At the last moment, De-young opens his inventory, and the clone's sword accidentally enters the portal, hitting itself instead. The clone falls to its knees, and De-young remarks, "The inventory came through at the perfect time, didn't it?" He finally defeats the clone, completing the absurd mission. The system announces that he has achieved 100% divine realization. His body will now return to its original state, granting him access to the full hell system on Earth. As his power surges, his clothes tear from the strain. He's thrilled to have regained his strength but grumbles, "Bringing back the scars too? That's just me." The system informs him of an unread message. He hesitates but decides to check it. The message states that Hell has crowned De-young as its new lord, and during his absence, celestial forces isolated Hell's space and time. The demonic beasts, trapped in pandemonium by the celestial forces, await salvation from their absolute lord. Annoyed, De-young interrupts the system, saying, "Get to the point already." The system seems to be asking for his help, but De-young scoffs. 80 years of struggling through that crap, and now you want my help because I'm the new lord of hell? Forget it. He flips off the system and commands it to leave him alone. Meanwhile, in hell, demons and beasts cry out for their lord. The next morning at the hospital, De-young is casually doing handstand push-ups. He's already at his 55th repetition. At that moment, his mother and the doctor were looking at him silently through the door. The doctor says that it seems her son is an awakened one, doesn't it? But the mother replies that his symptoms were different from those of an awakened person. He said so himself. The doctor responds that it's just that there were no clear signs before, but now the only explanation for how quickly he recovered is that he is, in fact, an awakened. She asks how this could have happened to her De-young, and the doctor says that they did everything they could. He suggests they pay a visit to the Hunter Association. The mother thanks the doctor for everything he's done for them, and the protagonist listens silently. Later, as they leave the hospital in a taxi, the protagonist wonders, "Awaken, Hunter Association, what the hell is all that?" He realizes he didn't notice how much the world around him had changed, as he was so focused on his missions. He thinks his mother is hiding something from him. He wonders what happened to Earth in the last 10 years that he was asleep. They pass through some destroyed areas of the city, eventually arriving at a humble residential neighborhood. The protagonist's mother tells him to go inside, and she'll quickly speak with the neighbor. As he enters, he sees a girl taking money, and he stares at her, asking who she is. The girl is shocked to see him, and the mother says, "June, you should eat something. What do you want today?" But then she notices the girl and asks, "Wait, you've been here all this time?" The girl didn't answer her calls, and the mother was worried. The protagonist wonders, "Is this Dessous?" The mother realizes the girl had been taking money, and sighs, "Not again." The girl lowers her head, walks past him, and says nothing. The protagonist, a bit frustrated, mutters, "I've been in hell for 80 years. and I couldn't even recognize my own sister. Desu walks by him and says he looks healthy, but those 10 years were hellish. He's clearly disturbed by her words. At that moment, someone starts kicking their gate. The protagonist is annoyed, as it's the same gangsters who had come to collect money, making a huge racket. The mother tells Desu to go inside, but the gangsters continue kicking, shouting that they know their home. One of them questions if it's the right house, but another says they can just break in. Desu steps outside and remarks, "These idiots are so loud." She walks past them, and one of the gangsters asks, "Who is this girl?" The other responds, "I don't know, maybe she's their daughter." The gangsters head toward the house, and the mother explains that she had been too busy to contact them. She says she will pay them now. Suddenly, the wallet flies away, and Doong screams for his mother. One of the gangsters, a man with a scar, slapped her, asking if they would accept this little bit of money. Seeing his mother fall, Doong becomes enraged. As the scarred man enters, he sees his companion thrown to the ground and asks, "What's going on?" The other points at the protagonist, asking if it's him. It's Doong, who's now ready to destroy these punks. "I've been dying to see you again," he says. The scarred man questions how he's standing, remembering that Doong had been in a wheelchair. "Looks like you've recovered quite well, huh?" Doong asks if the man knows what it's like to survive in hell. The man barely has time to respond before he's grabbed by the face. Doong says, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth," and begins slapping him repeatedly. He slaps him again and again, throwing the thug to the ground. Doong says, "You still have more to pay for." The thug can barely open his eyes, bleeding from the mouth and nose. He grabs a chair to defend himself and asks if Doong has lost his mind, but Doong simply punches the chair, shattering it, and sends the man's face slamming into the gate. Another thug, nervous and wielding a knife, tries to take action, but Doong grabs his hand. "How's your arm?" "I'm sure it's fine." He then snaps the thug's hand with ease, causing him to drop the knife and scream in pain. The scarred thug asks if Doong thinks he'll get away with this, but Doong says, "I have the perfect solution. Just kill you and leave no evidence behind." The mother, seeing the violence, begs him to stop, pleading with him, as the gangsters flee in terror, getting into their car and speeding away. Doong wonders how someone who was once in a wheelchair could have done all that. His mind races, trying to understand how someone who hasn't moved in 10 years could suddenly become a monster. The other gangster asks what they should do now, considering their boss won't be happy about this. The first one says it doesn't matter, they need to go back and deal with Doong, but then one of them sees Desu and orders the car to stop. Back at Doong's house, his mother explains that after he went into a coma, doctors couldn't figure out what happened. They moved him from one hospital to another. They sold their house and business, thinking he'd wake up soon, but he stayed asleep for 10 years. That's when someone began offering them non-bank loans. The loan wasn't easy, and the interest started to pile up. The protagonist then asks Desu if she's still studying, noticing that she's just walking around and not doing anything with her life. His mother responds that she dropped out of school 2 years ago. She explains that Desu got hurt working at a restaurant last year, and she wanted to help. Desu had been through a lot working at gas stations and convenience stores late at night. The protagonist comments that she should have at least finished school first. The mother wishes that were possible, but says they needed to save him first. She also mentions that Desu has been acting strangely in recent months, being a little rebellious and taking money from the house. The protagonist, frustrated, says he should have been left to die, but the mother firmly replies, "No, they're family. I would never do that to my own son." Doong feels really bad about this, and just then, his mother's phone rings. She mentions that it's the same people who were just here. The protagonist takes the phone, answers it, and asks if they're still not done. He listens and then curses, calling them sons of bitches. The call reveals that Desu has been kidnapped by them. One of the gangsters on the phone says that Doong messed with the wrong people and demands 100 million in exchange for her release, claiming that with Doong's skills, this shouldn't be a problem. He warns Doong to cooperate if he wants to see his sister again in one piece. Enraged, the protagonist hangs up the phone. His mother asks what happened, but Doong calmly says he'll go out for a bit. She warns him not to do anything dangerous, as he might get hurt or even end up in prison and might not come back alive. The protagonist, however, ignores her concern and thinks to himself that killing these thugs won't solve anything. Even after leaving, he'll still be trapped in hell. At that moment, the system sends him a message, and he stops to read it. His mother doesn't see the system and asks why he stopped. Doing turns to her and says, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." The system has given him a new mission called the Adaptation of the Returned, with the reward being the activation of one of his basic abilities. The protagonist comments that the system could have sent the message a little earlier. He accepts the mission and is given several ability options: B rank Poison, A rank Stealth, D rank Infernal Flames, and Shadow Summoning. He decides none of these abilities is as good as Shadow Summoning and selects it. Meanwhile, the gangsters holding Dessous question whether Doong will actually come after them. One of them says he wouldn't dare not show up, and even if he doesn't come, they've still got a hostage. But suddenly, the elevator experiences a power surge, and one of the criminals asks what's going on, wondering if the lights went out. Then, something emerges from the floor, and when the first gangster sees it, he's completely shocked, wondering what the hell is going on. The protagonist, with his new shadow summoning ability, appears and says, "Well, who else could it be? If you wanted money, here I am with it." He tests his new ability, and the shadow magic in his hand turns into a gooey substance that he crushes, letting it fall to the ground with a cloud of smoke. A flame quickly ignites. Doong recalls punching one of the criminals in the face and remembers that his blood was on his clothes. He uses the shadows to trace the blood and find the gangster's location. Back in the elevator, the criminals are panicking. The one with the broken arm tries to react first, but Doong easily grabs his face and slams him to the ground, knocking him out cold. The scarred man, seeing this, is shocked and asks if Doong isn't awakened. Dessous, understandably scared, is trembling, but the protagonist asks, "What the hell isn't awakened?" The scarred man tells him not to play dumb. When the elevator finally reaches the floor, the scarred man warns his companions that there's an intruder, but Doong is already there, knocking him down with one strike, sending him crashing into the ground. The rest of the gangsters grab anything they can to fight back, but it's clear that Doong doesn't even flinch. The lights start flickering, and when one of the gangsters attacks him, the attack passes right through him as he turns into goo again. Doong reforms behind the thug and lands a powerful kick to his face. Another gangster tries to attack from behind, but Doong punches him instead. He then proceeds to take down the rest of the thugs one by one, his movements accompanied by the flashing of electricity throughout the room. Finally, after knocking everyone out, Doong walks back to the elevator, where Dessous is still trapped. He asks if she's okay, then removes the tape and bindings from her. Dessous, confused, asks what Doong plans to do now. He replies that he'll find her again once he finishes business up here. As the elevator doors close, he leaves, ready to deal with everyone in his way. Later, the plane, more criminals, all beaten, knocked out, dead. Then, protagonist slowly climbs the stairs until more criminals spot him, wondering who he is. He tells them they're like cockroaches. Obviously, they get angry, but he says that cockroaches are the same. No matter how many you kill, they always come back, and it's extremely annoying. A little later, more people are thrown out the window. Meanwhile, a boss is receiving a call. He says he's relaxing and that it must be something really important. They tell him he has to come back because they're facing serious problems. The boss asks if they think he's a dog who takes orders, but they tell him it's an emergency. There's a monster there. The call ends, and, of course, the boss is furious. He crushes his phone and prepares to solve whatever needs to be solved. Meanwhile, in the building, everyone is dead. The protagonist walks through, eventually meeting the last living criminal. The criminal tells him to stay away, terrified and trembling, but his screams are useless. Suddenly, something breaks through the wall. It's the crime boss, who smashes everything in his path. He grabs the protagonist by the face and throws him to the ground, telling him that he made a mess. The protagonist, in turn, is actually quite impressed with the boss's power. He thinks these guys are common, not special. It was obvious, but he was busy training, so he hadn't noticed earlier. Suddenly, several shadowy hands try to grab the boss, but they only tear his clothes as he moves away, trying to escape. Protagonist wonders if this is the guy who caused all this destruction. After brushing the dust off, the protagonist asks if the boss is awakened too, but the boss says it's far too late for regrets, and that he'll send the protagonist to hell. The protagonist asks, "Hell?" Then, the boss's muscles grow even larger, ripping his clothes. At that moment, the protagonist doesn't even react properly, just landing a punch to the boss's face. The guy barely had time to breathe before he lost a tooth. The protagonist asks why he took his clothes off. Does he think he gets hurt less without them? The boss is left wondering how this guy defeated him so easily. He won't accept it, but then he's kicked in the face. Protagonist starts stomping on him, and the protagonist asks if the boss at least knows what hell is like. He says this guy hurt his family while he was away. The boss, now covered in blood and crying, realizes that this kid is on a completely different level. He begs for mercy, offering money. He has money. The protagonist asks where it is, and the boss says it's in the cabinet behind him. Protagonist checks, saying that if the boss insists, he won't refuse. He moves closer, but the boss gets up and runs. Protagonist tells the last living criminal that if he doesn't leave now, he'll die too. The criminal runs away, apologizing. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, the boss, all bruised, says he will kill him and his mother too. But the protagonist is inside the car, saying he forgot to ask one thing: the safe password. Idiot. The boss asks how he's there, but the protagonist wonders why that matters in a moment like this. The important thing is that he can find him whenever he wants. Outside, only screams are heard. Later, on the building's rooftop, the protagonist opens his inventory and a portal. He had obtained a total of 532 million W and wonders what he can buy with it. He says he could at least buy a small house. Later, in a cell phone store, the salesman shows off a foldable phone, equipped with everything. If paid in cash, it costs 3 million W. The protagonist thinks it's a bit expensive and asks about another model. The salesman mentions it's the latest, very popular among the girls, and costs only 2 million W. The protagonist asks, among the girls? The salesman thinks it's a very expensive phone for him, but the protagonist says he'll take 2. The salesman is thrilled and thanks him profusely. Back at home, the protagonist leaves the bag with his new phone on top, and his mother calls him for dinner. He says he'll leave now but will come back later. His mother asks where he's going, but when she looks, he's already gone. She wonders when he left. Later, in the nightlife scene, at a restaurant and bar, Chan-ho is waiting for Dawn. He arrives with a completely different aura, and Chan-ho comments that he's not like he was in the hospital. They have a typical Korean barbecue and toast with drinks. Chan asks what the protagonist plans to do now, and he replies that he's not sure. When protagonist drinks, he exclaims that it's good, but Chan-ho says he needs a plan. He's not in school anymore. Then, Dawn asks Chan-ho what can be done with 500 million today. Chan-ho asks if he really has that much, and the protagonist smiles, but Chan-ho crushes his dreams, saying that 500 million is only enough for a down payment on a small apartment in Ku. The protagonist asks how much money it takes just to buy an apartment. He then asks how much an apartment costs in the heart of Ku. Shan-R responds, saying it must be around 2 billion, and the protagonist becomes completely discouraged. But Shan-R says, "Don't worry. The world has changed a lot since you were unconscious." The protagonist takes another sip, and Shan-R mentions hearing from his mother that maybe the protagonist has awakened. The protagonist responds that they need to understand what awakened means before talking about it, and Shan-R agrees, saying he probably doesn't even know what it means. They step outside to talk more. Shan-R explains that the world has changed a lot since the protagonist went into a coma. Suddenly, portals started appearing on Earth. At first, the phenomenon was investigated and controlled on a national level, but after a while, fractures in the portals started to appear, allowing monsters to escape. A massacre ensued as these creatures attacked everything in their path. Humanity tried to stop them with all kinds of weapons, but none of them were effective. As a result, there were many casualties. The protagonist asks if nothing works, not even tanks. Shan-R replies that ordinary weapons don't work, but over time, they realized that weapons with aura made from the materials of the monsters themselves were effective against them. People who could use these aura weapons are called awakened. Shan-ar says this is true for the protagonist too, and Doong takes out his phone, asking, just like me, right? Shan-ar asks if he bought a foldable phone, and the protagonist confirms it, saying it's the latest technology. But Shan-ar scoffs, saying it's been on the market for years. The protagonist gets annoyed, and Shan-ar calls him an idiot. However, Shan-ar continues, saying that being able to use one's own aura to enhance physical abilities is another unique trait of an awakened person. Shan-ar mentions that the protagonist's body has improved rapidly, and he's heard that the protagonist dealt with the troublemakers bothering his mother. The protagonist asks if being awakened also means money, and Shan-ar is completely shocked, asking if he's joking. The protagonist says that, depending on how much he's paid, he could be considered an awakened one. Suddenly, a tear in space-time appears before them, a portal opens, and an army of creatures emerges. Naturally, everyone is terrified. These creatures are ready for a massacre. The population is unprepared and too scared to run, but the monsters are shouting their war cries as everyone flees. Shan-ar and the protagonist stay behind, and Shan-ar comments on how the fracture appeared out of nowhere. Doong asks what kind of ugly creatures these are, as they're very different from those from hell. The protagonist picks up a piece of rubble and wonders if he should test it. He exerts a lot of force and throws it at one of the creatures, but it doesn't seem to affect it. The protagonist realizes that the creature is protected by a sort of barrier. Shan-ar says that only aura can hurt them. Doong, interested, watches as one of the creatures charges at him, ready to crush him. Shan-ar says it's all over, but then blood splashes on Doong's face, and when he opens his eyes, he sees the protagonist has killed the creature with a blow to its head. The protagonist then says that punches work, and Shan-ar wonders how the protagonist just killed the creature with his bare hands. Meanwhile, other creatures charge at the protagonist, but with each punch, he's destroying their heads. Shan-ar wonders if the protagonist is an awakened rank B or higher. However, he decides not to waste time admiring him, as people are still in danger. Across the street, more creatures are surrounding normal people who can't defend themselves. The terrified people don't know where to run, but Shan-ar tells everyone not to worry because he knows the way to a safe shelter. He tells them to follow him quickly. However, more creatures appear, surrounding them completely. Now, there's no escape. People scream and don't know where to run as the monsters attack. Some die, others beg for their lives. Just as a child is about to be struck, Shan-ar manages to jump in and save the child. He delivers a knee strike to the creature, killing it instantly. Shan-ar says, Doong, finally, and as the creature rolls away, Doong comments that the monsters are a bit annoying to deal with and says anyone in his way will die. Shan-ar smiles at him, then continues leading the people to safety. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant they were at earlier, a camera films the scene, showing a live stream of the protagonist killing monsters. The restaurant worker watches in awe, saying, "My God, he's tearing them apart." The protagonist is surrounded by huge monsters, and the worker shouts, "Hey, behind you," but it's too late. Doong is struck and thrown away. The worker is horrified, and people in the live chat ask if Doong has died. It looks like the protagonist is standing still, but he's not dead. Meanwhile, in the sewers, everyone was running toward the shelter. Shan-ho managed to get the child back to her mother, and while they hugged, a guy asked Shan-ar if he was really going back. Shan-ar said yes. After all, Doong was still out there. Meanwhile, Doong was still stuck in that car, and the creatures slowly approached him, ready to kill him. The guy from the restaurant said that at this rate, Doong was going to get into trouble, just as one of the creatures prepared to attack. Aiming for Doong's head, the guy filming already covered his eyes, but when the attack landed, the creature seemed confused because Doong was no longer there. With a punch, he ripped the head off the nearby creature. The guy filming said, "This guy is really good." Doong said that somehow his mana had been restored thanks to these damn creatures, and now he was going to take them all down, one by one. Without mercy, he began punching each of them, exploding their heads. The live chat started asking the cameraman to get closer, but he thought they just wanted him to die. Then, someone donated 5 million, promising another 5 million if he got even closer. Of course, the cameraman was tempted, but still too scared to get close. even for that much money. Meanwhile, the protagonist thought his mana was almost drained, and he was wasting it. So, he threw a punch to the chin of the largest creature in front of him, smashing its head. The donations kept coming in during the live stream, with requests for a close-up of the protagonist's face. The cameraman was clearly excited and started receiving donation after donation, but he kept saying he wouldn't go closer until he received 20 million. He'd get another 40 million if he did. In a large, wealthy company, it seemed these people were donating just to see who was behind the destruction of the creatures. One person commented that this money should make the little YouTuber move, suggesting it was worth spending to find out who the awakened one was. Speaking of awakened, Doong was standing on top of another creature's body, and the monsters were literally afraid of him. The protagonist said, "The little insects are scared," and then crushed the head of another creature. The one nearby barely reacted. The YouTuber was still too scared to get closer, but was now a little closer, hiding behind a car. The monster that seemed to be in charge of the others ordered the army of creatures to attack Doong. The protagonist said, "These guys never stop." His mana was almost gone again, but then Shan Ho appeared beside the cameraman, asking why he hadn't evacuated yet. The cameraman was so startled that his phone fell. Shan Ho asked if he was crazy. Why was he still here? The chat went wild when the camera fell, but Shan Ho pulled the guy and started dragging him to the shelter. The guy tried to grab his phone, saying, "No, my money," but it wasn't going to work. At that moment, a creature appeared right in front of them, and the cameraman fainted. Shan Ho was obviously scared, but he wondered what was wrong with this guy. Just as the creature was about to attack them, its head exploded. What pierced it was the weapon of these very creatures, and when Shan Ho looked, of course, it was Doong. He said, "Bullseye." Back in the restaurant, Doong asked why Shan Ho came back. Shan Ho replied, "Why not? I was worried." Doong said he needed to leave for about 20 minutes to deal with this. Shan Ho asked if he could survive in the meantime, and Doong said he'd be fine. The guilds should be arriving soon, too. Of course, Doong didn't know what a guild was. Shan Ho said he could ask about it after he came back. The protagonist was then notified by the system that he had achieved 100% completion. Now he could use Pantheon items in the real world and was asked if he wanted to enter the Pantheon. Doong said yes. A flaming portal opened before him. Shan Ho wondered how Doong was able to open a portal, as it was almost the same as the monsters used. As Doong entered the Pantheon, he thought he could barely believe how much effort it had taken to deal with these pests. He asked the system to show him how much mana he had now, and the system revealed that he had less than 10% of the mana he would have had as the absolute being. Doong muttered that 10% was pretty bad, but it wouldn't be a problem if he used a weapon, right? He asked the system how he could increase his mana as quickly as possible. The system started processing, creating the absolute being's journal. It was explained that once the journal was systematized, time and place would be processed as missions. After completing each mission, an appropriate reward would be given. Simply put, in every context Doong was in, a mission would adapt to what he was doing at that moment. Doong thought, "Wait, that journal, the one I wrote when I was in hell." He said it was just some paper he found to write on to keep from going crazy. The system then asked if he wanted to systematize his journal, and Doong answered, "Why not?" Then, the journal appeared before his eyes, materializing, and the system began the process of systematization. The journal started receiving huge amounts of power as it began printing. Doong felt dizzy from the flood of memories that hit him all at once. The journal began to burn, and the system said the printing was complete. Doong wondered what the hell that sensation in his head was. He questioned if he was going back to the time when he was gathering mana and remembered page 16, Predator's Forest. The system recreated page 16 for him, year 5, day 75, and soon, the Pantheon was covered in fog. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, Shan Ho was climbing the stairs with the boy and wondered if Shan R knew the guy who was fighting the creatures. The boy asked, "Excuse me, do you know that guy over there?" Shan Ho replied, "Why? Do you want to make money by taking pictures of his face?" The boy gave up, saying nothing, falling silent. Then, both of them heard loud noises from outside, and Shan Ho said it must be survivors, so they should stay quiet for now. But as they walked, Shan Ho received a notification on his phone. It was a message from the leader of the Soul Guild, saying the guilds wouldn't be able to reach the area and that they needed to leave immediately because the guilds had been delayed since the weekend. Shan Ho thought Doong had to move quickly. Meanwhile, in the Pantheon, Doong had completely transformed into the Predator's forest, and the system said that the forest from page 16 had been recreated. But Doong thought it was too quiet here. The system explained that this was an item realization mission, and he needed to increase his mana. The difficulty was medium, and the goal was to destroy the celestial being in the forest, with a time limit of 1 hour. As Doong was searching for the celestial being, a giant figure behind him began analyzing and identified Doong as an enemy to be eliminated, stating this like a robot. Immediately, a laser was fired from its eyes, but Doong managed to dodge it, quickly running away. He saw the large mechanical creature, and the system identified it as the White Colossus, a mechanical life form created by divine figures. Doong wondered, divine, huh? The creature, with a hand like a drill, tried to strike Doong, but he dodged and prepared for an attack. He thought, no time to think, I need to end this fast. With a punch, he smashed the robot's face, leaving a hole, but the robot was still moving. Its fingers extended like tentacles toward him. Doong thought, this creature is so annoying. He quickly rushed towards it, dodging the finger tentacles, and when the robot was about to strike, Doong counterattacked, landing a punch to its stomach. Well, if the robot even had a stomach. After the heavy hit, the robot couldn't take it and shattered into pieces, causing a huge explosion. Doong said, next. But then, he saw a core emerge from the destroyed creature, and he was shocked. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, on the roof, they found not survivors but dead bodies. Shan R realized things had gone terribly wrong. However, not everyone was dead. One person was alive, badly injured, but still alive. The YouTuber pointed out that the person was still alive. Shan Ho rushed to him, asking if he was okay, but the person could barely speak. Shan Ho asked what he was saying, and the man weakly whispered, behind you. When Shan R looked, a large creature was charging toward them, ready to kill. The boy shouted that they needed to run, but Shan Ho told him that they were already in danger and instructed him not to move until he told him to. The boy, not having seen the creature yet, was shocked when he did and nearly soiled himself. Shan Ho then said, when I yell, you run out the door unless you want to die here. The boy nodded, and when the creature roared and charged, Shan Ho shouted, now. Meanwhile, in the Pantheon, Doong was looking at the enormous ball that had appeared. The core spoke, announcing it was starting self-regeneration. As soon as Doong heard this, he realized the trouble he was in. The machine from before started regenerating its entire body, and Doong immediately charged at it, preparing a punch to hit the core. The core was resilient and didn't break immediately, so Doong performed a maneuver to attack right on top of the core when its regeneration was at 30%. He said, this is so annoying, and began rapidly attacking the core, filling it with punches. However, the regeneration process kept increasing, and Doong kept trying to destroy the core as quickly as it regenerated. Eventually, the core began to show signs of failure, and Doong shouted, just die already. But as he lowered his guard, a laser hit him. When he looked around, he saw several of these machines, grouped together and ready to kill him. He was surrounded by more than 9 of them, all aiming their lasers at him. He managed to jump and dodge, landing on the ground, having to pull away from the core, which was now 95% regenerated. Despite the barrage of lasers, Doong kept running toward the core. He was ready to finish off this machine, and with his final blow, he struck the core, causing it to explode across the horizon. He quickly moved away from the explosion, thinking that at this rate, he was going to die here. He needed another method to kill these creatures and thought maybe he should check his printed memories. Perhaps he could find a solution. But as he felt a pain in his head, he accessed a specific memory and said, now I remember. This should work. Meanwhile, in the real world, Shan Ho and the boy were trying to escape while the creature prepared to attack, ready to crush them both. However, when the creature struck, it missed because the two were already running toward the door. Shan Ho began to close the door, but the creature's arms smashed through everything. Luckily, they were safe because the creature couldn't fit its entire body through the door. It pulled back with its claws, and Shan Ho realized the creature had given up, saying, we should be safe now. Back in the Pantheon, The giant robot army was still trying to capture Doom, who could barely counterattack. He was only running and dodging, but he thought, just a little more. Dodging the robot's tentacle-like limbs, he gained momentum from a stone and leapt high into the air. Eventually, he found what he was looking for. Now running on a grassy field, he stopped and faced all of his approaching enemies, which seemed like an enormous wall, a true barrier. They began aiming at him and launching a joint attack. But Doom said, "It's too late for these idiots." Suddenly, the ground beneath the robots started to collapse, and Doom said, "This is the Predator's forest." An enormous creature emerged from beneath the earth, devouring the robots standing on the ground. Doom remarked, "The swamp whale still has quite the appetite." He added, "Good luck regenerating in its stomach. That thing can digest anything." The system then notified him that he had completed the condition and would now recover part of his absolute being's physical abilities. His body was enveloped in an aura, and he thought, "My mana has definitely increased." But beyond this reward, he received a bonus, the Dagger of Judgment. When the weapon materialized before him, he was clearly impressed. This weapon was of the sacred type, used by celestial judges to defeat enemies. It was crafted with the skin of a divine golem. Its unique feature was that it could be controlled remotely within a range of 100 meters, and the stronger the user's mana, the more powerful the weapon became. Doom said, "Remote control, huh?" He threw the dagger forward, and it returned like a boomerang, which he caught. He said, "This seems pretty useful," then stored it back in his inventory, thinking it was time to return to the real world. A portal appeared before him. Meanwhile, on the night news, one of the anchors reported that there had been a fracture in the gate near Nanguk, and the area was in total chaos. They noted that the situation was reminiscent of the Daegu incident. Another anchor commented that the biggest problem was that hunters affiliated with guilds and associations, who were responsible for these regions, weren't doing their job. The citizens trusted them, but they weren't doing their work properly. Gate fractures could happen at any time, and hunters needed to be prepared, no matter if it was a holiday or the weekend. The other anchor asked if he believed the association should take responsibility for this. Inside a car, a man watching the news was furious and remarked that it wasn't like the association's hunters were paid as well as those in the guild. "They're not prophets. There are things beyond their radar," he said. The man in the suit next to him told him to stop complaining. If they didn't clean up the incident, he didn't know about the others. But he, as the leader, would definitely be fired. They both fell silent for a moment before more news came in, announcing that a mysterious hunter had appeared in Nanguk and was dealing with the monsters from the gate fracture. Meanwhile, in the restaurant, the boy asked Shan-ar if they could really stay there considering what had happened on the rooftop. Shan-ar replied that it was horrible, but they had to wait. Then, they heard loud banging noises and monsters screaming. The boy asked if it was hunters who had arrived. Shan-ar wondered if they really were hunters, but then something flew out and crashed into the restaurant wall, breaking everything. That's when Shan-ho realized they weren't hunters. Doom, on the other hand, said, "Get out of the way of a man with an appetite." Shan-ho grinned, recognizing Doong's voice. Doong asked, "Aren't you a little late?" Then Chan asks, "What the hell happened to him?" But he places his hand on his stomach and asks if everything's okay with the protagonist. The protagonist points to the boy and tells him to prepare the grill because he's hungry and wants to eat meat. Of course, both of them are in complete shock, while a headless monster is right at the door of the store. Chan asks if he's an idiot for wanting to eat in a situation like this. Later, the protagonist grabs a piece of meat, all bloody, and asks if it's monster meat. He figures it must be, so he starts eating, even though everyone else is disgusted. Suddenly, a soldier shows up, asking if there are any survivors and if everyone's okay. The little boy cheers, saying they're saved and thanks the soldier. But the soldier asks what the protagonist is doing in a situation like this. Chan thanks the soldier for his good work in coming to save them at this hour, explaining they got lost because they didn't know the way to the shelter. He makes an excuse, saying his friend is in shock, which is why he's eating, and he's just not well at the moment. Chan says he'll take him to the hospital later for a checkup. The soldier tells Chan-ho he can't just leave, but Chan-ho shows his badge, explaining he's from the Seoul clan, the leader of the first team. He adds that his clan is also involved in this. The soldier says that if he's from a clan, then everything's fine, and he'll lead the way. As they walk down the street, With all the monsters wiped out, the hunters from the association approach. One of them is already vomiting from the scene, and the man in the suit wonders what the hell happened here, telling the other guy to hold his vomit and get out of there. He approaches the soldier, says he's a hunter from the association, and wants to see the area with him. The man in the suit wonders who this mysterious hunter is, as such a powerful person must be even more cruel than these monsters to do this to them. Meanwhile, on the road, Chan-ho is in the car with the protagonist. Chan-ho offers for him to stay at his place for the night, but the protagonist says no, his family will worry. Chan-ho jokes that he'll be lucky if his mother only worries if she sees the news, she'll probably have a heart attack. The protagonist considers it, but Chan-ho says he'll inform his mother, and everything will be fine. He tells him to rest, take a shower, and he can eat whatever he wants after. At the building where Chan-ho lives, the protagonist is impressed by how fancy and well decorated it is. Chan-ho says he'll order fried chicken while the protagonist takes a shower. Later, while eating, the protagonist asks why all this food is in front of them, and Chan-ho explains that it's to compensate for the fiasco that happened while they were eating. He then brings up their previous conversation at the steakhouse, asking if hunters make good money. Chan-ho confirms that, yes, nowadays they're paid more than any other profession. He asks why the protagonist is interested in becoming one. The protagonist, munching on some fried chicken, says yes, he is. Chan-ho replies that that's great if he registers at the association, he'll likely rank at least B, or maybe even A. Chan-ho assures him of this. The protagonist asks what these ranks are, and Chan-ho explains that it's a ranking system. From best to worst, a B rank hunter, for example, can join a big guild or clan and easily make 30 million a month. The benefits are even greater if he becomes in a rank. The protagonist asks if there's anything higher than a rank, and Chan-ho says yes, there's this rank, but there are only 5 as rank hunters out of the 2 million awakened people. Chan-ho asks if the protagonist wants to become the 6th rank, but advises him to be satisfied with just being in a rank, as that's already very impressive. In Korea, rank hunters are treated like royalty. Chan-ho asks if he's sure he wants to become a hunter, and the protagonist confirms that he does. Chan-ho says he can trust him with that, and they toast, saying the protagonist will be a great star. Meanwhile, in a place even more luxurious than Chan-ho's house, someone is eating a small, expensive meal. The person eating says that the man who had been charging everyone should have listened to him, but then interrupts himself, saying they should eat the food before it gets cold. This person is the one who survived the protagonist's attack when he took all the money from the criminals. He tells them to start over and recap, asking if it's true that the protagonist is the one who destroyed that organization, turning it into a mess. The survivor confirms it, showing a photo of the protagonist. The man eating says that if this is true, they have a big problem. If the protagonist barely survived, he should have run away, right? This man stands up and asks if there was a reason the survivor is telling him this. The survivor replies that it's because he has nowhere else to go. This man, with long hair, is named El Sioku, the general manager of the Scarlet Demon clan. Sioku says it's obvious he wouldn't report this to the police either, but he needs to ask why the survivor is shaking so much. It must be because of his boss lying on the floor, and there was the body of that man who had been fighting the protagonist, with one arm ripped off and a lot of blood under his body. The poor bald man was trembling and begged for his life, asking to be spared. Sioku says it's fine, he just needs the money that was promised to him. If their office was raided, they should have some funds hidden somewhere, right? The bald man replies that he doesn't hold a high rank, so he doesn't know, he just has to trust him. Sioku thinks for a moment and says he will trust him. The bald man thanks him, but Sioku tells him there's no need to thank him. At that moment, the bald man's head explodes, and Sioku did this with just a touch. Blood sprays everywhere, and Sioku walks over to the desk, grabs the protagonist's file, and shows the photo to someone in the shadows, telling them to get rid of the bald man as quickly as possible, and without any mistakes. A hooded figure, hidden in the shadows, replies that they will take care of it. The next morning, at the Korean Hunters Association, Doong is looking at the large building. Chan-ho tells him to go to the reception and say he wants to register as an awakened. From there, Chan-ho will guide him. As Doong starts to walk in, Chan-ho yells at him not to forget to speak politely. If he keeps speaking the way he always does, they'll think he's crazy. Chan-ho says he'll work and will send a message with the results later. Doong is calm, but Chan-ho wonders why he's more nervous than the protagonist. Doong walks into the building and sees some people smoking and talking. He wonders if they're there to become hunters too. He passes by a person leaving the building, looking disappointed and sad. Doong thinks that they're probably just doing this for the money, but it's still chaotic inside. In examination room 3, Doong is sitting with other people, waiting. He holds the number 9 slip, and he thinks being a hunter seems pretty popular. He figures since he's number 9, it won't take long. Suddenly, he gets a notification from his mother, asking if he's still at Chan-ho's house. She asks when he'll come back since she's closing the store early today because her back hurt. Doong thinks it's better not to tell his mom that he wants to become a hunter. He starts typing quickly, saying he's still at Chan-ho's, going to take a shower, and will be home soon. She asks if he's eaten yet, and if not, they can have lunch together. Doong smiles, thinking he needs to get home quickly. At that moment, they call number 9. Meanwhile, in another examination room, a man is complaining, asking how he's an awakened person and hasn't been classified. The examiner says that his test result was negative. The bald man keeps insisting that his device is broken and asks how the association treats hunters nowadays. Meanwhile, people in the waiting area complain that this man is shouting too loudly. The bald man says his hair fell out overnight, so he must have awakened. Everyone starts laughing at him. Doong thinks it must have happened a while ago for him. Not today. His mother is probably waiting to eat lunch and will be waiting for a while. The bald man continues complaining, getting louder and louder until someone puts their hand on his bald head. The bald man turns around, asking who did that and how dare they. Doong asks if he didn't notice the line behind him. Mr. Bald Man. The bald man gets shocked, nearly wetting himself, and says the machine is definitely broken, and he's sure he's an awakened. Doong asks him if he's sure the device is broken, and a man in a suit, who is part of the association, says that the bald man is an awakened and that he'll test the machine. He approaches the machine, placing his hand near an orb that seems to be running electricity or pure energy. After a moment, it shines green, indicating that the bald man is a C rank. The bald man feels embarrassed, saying it's fine, and the woman tells him to leave because there are people waiting behind him. He runs off, saying he just made a mistake. The woman apologizes to Doong for the delay and says he can now be tested. Doong approaches the machine, and the woman asks the other examiner if they think the boy will get a high rank. He flicks her on the head and tells her to focus on her job, but the woman notices that Doong has a very intimidating aura. If he really is awakened, he will likely be ranked B or higher. Meanwhile, in the director's office at the association, the director gets a call and is told that he's needed in examination room 3. He asks why they're in such a hurry and what happened. They tell him he needs to see it for himself. The director takes the elevator down, thinking about whether an S rank has appeared. He wonders, no, that can't be right. There are so few of them in the world. Finally, the director arrives on the 6th floor of the building. The people in line are murmuring, and the director approaches them, asking them to excuse him. He then sees something shocking. The orb that detects an awakened person's power has broken. The machine has stopped working completely. The director asks, "What happened here?" and approaches the man who works there, asking what happened to the machine. The man in the suit explains that Doong placed his hand near the crystal, and the first thing that happened was that it changed colors repeatedly, like a rainbow. Then, a few moments earlier, in the examination room, the protagonist is watching the orb change colors and wonders if everything is okay with it. The examiner tells him that this happens from time to time, but when the orb cracks, the examiner is shocked. The protagonist doesn't understand what's going on. Outside, everyone hears the explosion, and smoke rises. The woman emerges, coughing from the smoke, and the examiner is in shock, asking what happened. He asks if Doong is okay, but Doong is worried. He asks if he's going to have to pay for this. The director asks the examiner if he's sure it was the machine's fault, and the man in the suit confirms it because all 3 orbs broke. Doong thinks that maybe he used too much energy. Doong then asks if he has to stay there until a result is given. The director replies, yes, of course, for the result, but the director thinks that putting Doong in another machine will just break more devices, and it'll become very costly for them. Then, the director tells Doong that they've never encountered a situation like this before, so he might have to be evaluated as borderline. The director explains that this means he can't be assessed through the crystal orb, and judges will evaluate him to finalize his classification through the results of a license test. Doong asks if this test is reliable, and the man in the suit says that the tests are standardized, with set numbers, so Doong doesn't have to worry about the authenticity of the test, it is reliable. Doong sighs, realizing that he doesn't have much of a choice, and agrees to take the test. Everyone says their goodbyes, telling him to be careful on his way out. As Doong is leaving, the director says this is going to be the death of him. A woman approaches and asks the director if the crystal reacts to the otherworldly energy inside a person. The director confirms, saying, exactly. She wonders if the boy might have such powerful energy that the crystal couldn't withstand it, and that might be why the machine exploded. The director chuckles and apologizes, saying that this is quite unrealistic. She's suggesting that he might be some kind of SSS rank. She says there could be a possibility, but the director questions if she realizes how ridiculous that sounds. Unless he's some kind of god or an absolute being, an SSS rank shouldn't exist. Later, Zhang is talking to Shanho on the phone. Shanho asks if Doong got the results, and Doong replies that they told him he's a borderline case. Shanho asks if the machine was broken, and Doong confirms that the machine broke. Shanho exclaims, "You've been fighting someone, haven't you?" Doong reassures him that no, he hasn't. Shanho asks if Doong put his hand near the machine and it broke on its own, and Doong admits that it did. Shanho comments that he can barely predict what Doong will do next and says, "I guess there's no other choice but to take the test, right?" Doong says he doesn't mind. Shanho tells him to get home safely and promises to send him the link to register for the test later. Doong hangs up the phone, but instead of walking, he stops in the middle of a plaza and looks back at a building under construction. He sees a laser, and there, a sniper is aiming at him. Going back a bit, from the sniper's perspective, she thinks to herself that this guy doesn't seem that strong, and that it doesn't matter how powerful an awakened person is, a single shot to the head should be enough. As she aims, Doong hangs up the phone and turns around. She is surprised and wonders if her position is exposed. There's no way it can't be, she thinks. He must just be looking back by chance. But then, Doong points directly at his temple and says, "Here, aim here." She wonders how he saw her and if he can hear her voice from such a distance. Her hand trembles as she realizes she needs to run now and try again later. But Doong shouts at her to shoot, and when she pulls the trigger, the bullet clearly has some special power. The protagonist doesn't even flinch. The bullet creates a massive explosion where he stands, sending smoke into the air. She thinks she must have hit him, but when the smoke clears, there's a crater around him, and he's completely unharmed. The bullet is crumpled up like an empty soda can. She realizes that the bullet had some kind of aura, and Doong just stares at her. She asks herself, who the hell is this guy? She knows she has to get out of there, so she drops her gun and runs. But just then, a dagger comes down on her calf, and of course, it knocks her down instantly. Doong is already there, ready to kill her. She's desperate now, and Doong says, "What a pity for you, because you hit exactly where you should have in my head. But this rubber bullet isn't enough to kill me." So, he dematerializes his dagger, and the sniper takes advantage of the moment to pull out a pistol, distance herself, and asks how he's standing after being shot by an aura bullet. She also wonders where the hell he came from. The silver-haired guy responds that he came from hell, and his name is Ransoon. She tells him to stop talking nonsense and starts shooting several aura bullets in his direction, telling him to die already. After her gun runs out of bullets, and the place is filled with smoke, she wonders if she managed to hit him. However, the protagonist appears behind her and asks, "Hit what?" Then, Doong begins to summon his shadows. The sniper gets desperate, but she's grabbed by the neck by the prota, who throws her into a wall, choking her. Soon, she is caught by Doong's shadows, which seem like living creatures with multiple hands. She faces a horrifying being full of mouths and eyes, and she panics, wondering what it is, until she simply faints. Doong remarks that she's already unconscious and adds that her murderous intent wasn't even that strong. Then, he collects all the bullets and thinks that it's really difficult to kill. He notices her sniper holster, disguised to hold a violin, and sees a picture of him, his mother, and his sister. He takes some of the bullets and throws them at her head until she wakes up. The sniper wakes up again, desperate, with those hands still around her body. But Doong says it's simple, she has to answer his questions, or she'll die. He shows her the photos from her holster and asks who's behind this. She thinks she can't expose the Scarlet Demon clan, so she decides to blame that guy ahead of her, Zum Maramba. She says that the person behind all this is Siam, the guy Doong had beaten earlier, the musclehead. She mentions hearing that Doong emptied his safe, so he probably wanted revenge. The Prota comments on the 500 million he took, and she confirms, offering to tell him the location he's at now. But then, out of nowhere, the Prota flicks one of the bullets from her pistol so hard that it creates a hole in her shoulder. She screams loudly and asks why he did that. She insists that she already told him everything, but Doong says it's normal among assassins, they never tell the truth. He warns her that if she says another silly thing like that, she'll die. Desperate, she starts to think about what to do next. Doong says he'll ask just one more time who sent her. She thinks that her contract is already ruined, and even if she goes back to that guy, he'll definitely kill her. He's a psychopath. She'll die either way, but she wonders if she's going to die anyway, will she tell him the truth? She asks the Prota if he really thinks she'll talk, even if he asks 1,000 times. She places her hand on her aura core right on her chest, and Doong thinks, is this self-destruction? She tells him to go to hell, but then he flicks the bullet again, this time sending it straight through her heart. She barely has time to react before spitting out enough blood to kill her. The Prota says she can go first because he personally is tired of hell. She dies there, on her knees, surrounded by blood. Doong reflects that he'll never know who's behind this. Now, he has to hide the body or clean up the area, but he's not in the mood for it. Maybe he'll need to use that item. He opens his diary and starts looking for a death memory. He finds page 134 and, pulling this memory into his mind, he thinks this should solve it. He opens the Pantheon again and hears the system informing him that the demonic beasts from Pandemonium welcome his absolute being and ask for the date and location he'd like to recreate from the diary. He replies, page 35, the Soul Prison. It's explained that the Soul Prison is the main weapon of the Ghost King, one of the 15 masters of Hell's authority, along with the demon god. When Doong Sung fought and defeated him, he used his own weapon, which is an artifact that brings the dead back to life. But as summons, Doong thinks that when he first entered the Soul Prison, he thought it would be easy to fight, but the ghosts he summoned were so weak that he couldn't even use them properly. The system asks if he wants to recreate page 134, year 67, day 198 in the Pantheon. Doong replies that it will be very useful for him, so he agrees. The system starts to alter the space around him, and soon he finds himself in a completely dark environment, filled with shadows. This is the river of the undead, with many skulls floating through it. Doong thinks that on the other side of the river is the territory of the Ghost King. He recalls that there used to be a boat for him to use, but now there's nothing, no wood or anything to use. He realizes he can't swim across, as just touching the river would cause him to disintegrate completely. The system displays a notification for the Soul Prison of the Ghost King mission with medium difficulty. Now, the protagonist must destroy the celestial forces that have taken over the river of the living dead within 30 minutes. The reward is 50% of the Soul Prison completion. Suddenly, someone starts targeting the protagonist, and an army appears before him, with several glowing eyes in the sky. The protagonist wonders, what the hell is this? These are flying creatures, similar to those encountered earlier, and they are also celestials. The system calls them White Lords, mechanical life forms created by divine figures. Naturally, their mission is to eliminate the protagonist. These tiny creatures, like insects, fall right in front of him, shooting webs that are actually web bombs. The webs can even melt stone, and the protagonist wonders if he'll get a boat for killing these creatures. He summons his judgment dagger, and when a larger creature appears, he quickly charges in at close range, making several cuts across its body. He easily slides the dagger through, splitting the creature in half, but as he does so, a rain of poisonous bombs appears before him. The protagonist says, "Poison bombs? I don't even need to dodge these." creatures. Using his aura, he pushes the bombs away, and the rest of them hit a barrier around him, leaving him virtually immune and unharmed. The protagonist comments that it will be tedious to kill one at a time and mentions that the creatures don't seem to want to come down all at once. He decides to make them fall. Using his blood power, he strikes the ground with great force, sending magic through the stones and across the entire area. Instead of descending, the creatures crash to the ground. Taking advantage of this, he begins cutting down all the creatures that fell, destroying their cores in one go. For the last creature, he grabs the core and crushes it with his hands. Several system notifications appear, confirming that he has completed the mission and will receive his reward. An orb materializes in front of him, igniting into flames before transforming into a small item, a relic. The system announces that this is the blessing of the malignant insect, a defensive item made from the remains of the White Lord. This armor renders the wearer immune to demonic energy. The protagonist thinks that this could be useful. The system asks if he wants to equip the armor. Realizing that the system wants him to swim across the river, he puts on the armor, which allows him to swim without issue. With his new armor, he reaches the other side of the river. The system mentions that the demonic beasts are impressed by the protagonist's swimming skills, and the demons of Pandemonium apologize for not being able to assist the absolute being. The protagonist tells them all to be quiet. Approaching the territory, he notices a bright light ahead. He has now entered the territory of the Ghost King. The protagonist comments that there is no one here, and that the old castle where the Ghost King resided has disappeared. The system mentions that the demons of Pandemonium are saddened by this news. The protagonist tells the system it doesn't need to inform him every time, but he also says it's not their concern. The mission isn't supposed to be inside the castle anyway. Suddenly, the ground trembles, and structures resembling pillars or obelisks rise from the earth. The system explains that this is a celestial obelisk, an architectural type designed and built by celestial beings with sacred stone. It acts as a prison for the undead wandering the underworld. A divine light shines on the obelisk, and a door appears, resembling a temple. The protagonist realizes that his mission is about to begin as soon as he enters. This is the sole prison of the Ghost King mission, high difficulty. He must destroy all the celestial objects created by the obelisk within a 2-hour time limit. However, a creature is protecting the obelisk, an armored and hooded figure. The protagonist wonders if he's seeing things correctly. This creature is clearly an undead, but the protagonist recognizes it as a spectral soldier. He thinks that as long as it's not classified as a demon beast, it shouldn't pose any real threat. But then, an army of these spectral soldiers charges at him. The protagonist simply shouts, ordering them to kneel before him. His intimidating aura affects them all, and the system notes that the demons of Pandemonium are saddened by the mutation of the spectral soldiers, as they did not obey the protagonist and still attacked him. Using his powers, the protagonist easily begins eliminating each soldier. He recalls that none of them have cores, but it might be due to the cursed obelisk. More of these soldiers appear and charge at him, but the protagonist activates bloody demonization, declaring that he will use everything at once. The system explains that bloody demonization transforms the target into a half-human, half-demon form. The target loses health over time, but their stats and attack power increase by 300%. The protagonist thinks that he will finish everything, including the obelisk. With his high speed, he begins decimating the army. He moves so fast that he's barely visible, only leaving beams of light across the battlefield. Without difficulty, he destroys 50 soldiers with a single punch, and the system keeps tallying the demons he kills. Facing the massive obelisk, the protagonist thinks that starting from within might be more effective. While the soldiers attempt to stop him, he simply pushes through, knocking them all down. Then, with his speed, he scales the obelisk, breaking every part of it simultaneously until it finally collapses. At that moment, the undead disintegrate into dust, and the battlefield is left empty except for the protagonist. The system announces that the cleaning condition is complete. Now, the Soul Prison mission is 100% finished, and he has also obtained the expansion rune. Both rewards materialize before him. He asks if one is an item reward, and the other is from the mission completion. He decides to check the other first and collects it. As the orb approaches him, he receives the soul prison, an artifact, and the ability to imprison souls. When an enemy dies, he can imprison their soul. With the second ability, he can revive these imprisoned souls in his name, and with the third ability, he can share memories with these soldiers. The protagonist thinks that's fine. His initial goal is to discard the corpses and gather information, but 20 soldiers is too few. He figures that's probably why he got the other item as a reward. He collects it, and the system asks if he wants to use the expansion rune on the soul prison. He agrees, and now his limit is 100 imprisoned souls. When he breaks the orb, he absorbs the soul prison. The protagonist feels that his goal for the day has been completed. He wonders if he's going back to reality, but then he sees a third orb, much brighter than the others. The system informs him that some demonic beasts are retreating because of the mysterious energy emanating from the light, and it requests that the absolute being investigated. The protagonist asks if he's really obligated to listen to them all the time. He collects the third orb, and when absorbed, it shines even brighter. It goes straight into his hand and burns, leaving a circular mark. Then, a different system screen appears before him. He asks what it is now, and the system responds that he has collected something mysterious related to an enigmatic puzzle. It seems he's gathered one of 3 parts of the puzzle. The protagonist comments that he thought it was something useful, but it's just a tedious puzzle, a waste of time. He opens a portal back to reality and says he's going back. Upon returning to the abandoned building, he's slightly shocked to find that the body is no longer there. He wonders where it went. Back home, Dasun doesn't seem happy with him and mentions that his soup is already cold. The protagonist apologizes, and Dasun tells him to hurry and eat. After reheating the food, the news shows another fracture incident, but his mother turns off the TV and says they need to eat now. The protagonist mentions that the world has changed a lot while he was in a coma. He says he saw many monsters on the news, which makes his mother nervous. She admits that she thought he'd be in shock over the situation, which is why she hadn't told him immediately. She apologizes for keeping him in the dark. The protagonist reassures her that it's fine. They've survived in this dangerous world without letting him get hurt. He should be the one thanking her. His mother becomes embarrassed, and Dasun fakes a cough to hide her reaction. The protagonist wonders what kind of atmosphere he left. He asks if they need anything, and Dasun asks why he's asking, as though he has money to buy them something nice. His mother notices he's already finished eating and asks if he wants more. Meanwhile, at the Soul Clan, the protagonist is calling to inform them that he'll be absent for a while. The person on the other end asks why, especially with the license exam coming up. The protagonist mentions that he'll be training in a place deep in the mountains, and Shan-hook asks if that's really necessary. The protagonist explains that he encountered an annoying insect, but it escaped when he was caught off guard. Shan-hook is confused about what insect he's talking about, but the protagonist thinks that the body simply disappeared without a trace. He tells Shan-hook to take care of his mother and sister while he's gone. Shan-hook agrees, and the protagonist reflects that no matter who these people are, they need to leave the nest on their own. Shan-hook wonders what's happening with Dun. Meanwhile, in the Scarlet Demon clan, the subordinates say they've taken care of the body. However, the person they were looking for, the protagonist, must be quite powerful, as he killed a B-rank assassin. Ku says everything is fine since the protagonist is apparently going to participate in the exam, so they'll have a chance to capture him. He asks if everything is okay with Jin Shell. The guy inside the capsule responds that he's fine and says, "It's time to start this party, isn't it?" He tells his brother he's been waiting for this day for so long. The scientist says that Zhang Jinzal has awakened at rank A, and his body is stable. He asks if they can begin injecting the serum. Akwu tells Zhenao that it will be very painful, but he'll have to endure it. Jin Shell says he's been ready since the moment he entered this clan. CQ tells them to start the serum injection. At that moment, Jin Shell's body remains stable despite the pain, but when the injection reaches 55%, it starts to cause him severe discomfort. The scientist notices his body isn't handling it as well as expected, but CQ tells them to continue. The scientist warns that at this rate, he could die, but CQ retorts that if he's the type of person who dies from this, They don't want him anyway. The scientist barely responds and announces that the injection is at 80%, then 90%. When it reaches 100%, it seems like Jin'el is going to explode. His heart rate drops to 0, and he lies motionless in silence. A tense atmosphere fills the lab. The scientist remarks that it looks like he's dead, but Si-Kwu tells him to be quiet. It turns out Jin Shell isn't dead, though. As his heartbeat returns, suddenly, a surge of adrenaline hits him. The scientist is stunned, and Jin Shell breaks out of the capsule, shouting. Si-Kwu smiles and says he almost disappointed him, but that Jin Shell did very well. He tells him to prepare for the next 10 days. Meanwhile, from the protagonist's perspective, he receives a message from Shan, telling him that he can only use weapons and armor provided by the association during the exam. The protagonist thinks the equipment will be poor, but he can compensate with his strength. However, he wants to check something. He grabs a branch and rubs it along his shoulder to see if anything happens. His weapon, which exists in an astral form, appears only in the Pantheon and Hell. The protagonist thinks this is great. He can always use his defensive gear. As for weapons, he needs to test them. He reaches into his inventory, grabs the dagger of judgment, and tells the system to recognize the branch as his weapon. The system asks if he wants to carry the dagger of judgment in the branch. The protagonist agrees, and the dagger dematerializes, materializing inside the branch. The system announces that the loading is complete. The protagonist remarks that weapons are possible, and with this, he gets his beloved great sword. He says it's time to take it and opens the Pantheon. Later, in the territory of the Fire King, the protagonist is walking on the hot sand in sneakers. He says he never thought he'd return to this miserable place. Suddenly, a pack of wolves appears before him. The protagonist barely reacts, but he realizes he's surrounded. The system announces the mission on page 337, the Great Sword of Hellfire. The difficulty is high, and he must eliminate Orsai's followers patrolling the Fire King's territory and collect their soul stones. The time limit is 2 hours. Orsai's followers are beasts, soldiers tamed by Orsai, the Lord of the Skies. The protagonist remarks that he didn't think he'd use his abilities for this purpose, but then he tears his hand and uses his blood to summon the soul prison. One of the enormous wolves appears before him, and the protagonist asks if it wants a snack. The creature growls in anger and prepares to attack, but the protagonist is much faster. He lands multiple cuts on the creature's body. Even though he kills this one, there are more to come. That's it for today's work, everyone.